I froze like a guy watching his dog get stolen, with the leash still in his hand. They were driving metal into my backyard like it was a public parking lot. 12 guys in hard hats, sweatshirts, and zero hesitation, turning my peace and quiet into a construction zone. Right in the middle of them was Clarissa Vaughn, president of the Hollow Creek Estates HOA and, apparently, queen of creative land theft. "Community property," she announced, pointing at my lawn like she'd just discovered it. "You really should have read the fine print, Mr. Radner." I hadn't even had my second sip of coffee. Then came the signs: private area, HOA members only, padlocks, fencing, a gate I didn't own cutting straight across the yard I thought was mine. And just like that, the view I'd bought, the garden I'd planned, the dream I'd worked 20 years for, gone. But Clarissa didn't know what I knew, that underneath this house was something older than her clipboard, something hidden, and something about to rewrite the script. If you're tuning in from Florida, Texas, or anywhere, HOA madness is real. Drop a comment below that says, "Not today, HOA." This story isn't just about fences, it's about fighting back when someone tries to outpaper you on your own land. And hey, if you've ever tangled with an HOA or just love a good underdog story, hit that follow button and stick around. I've got plenty more tales where fences fall, secrets rise, and justice tunnels its way to daylight. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. 6 months earlier, I had been suffocating behind 2 monitors and a badge scanner in Palo Alto, juggling deadlines and surviving tech meetings that could have been emails. I'd saved, I'd invested, I'd eaten enough ramen in my 20s to make early retirement taste like filet mignon. When the market finally smiled on me, I cashed out and ran. My prize was a century-old colonial in Hollow Creek, a town with just enough charm and not too many people. My house had wraparound porches, crooked door frames, and a backyard that bled into a public park. I saw deer on day 3. I saw peace on day 4. The real estate agent mentioned an HOA, but brushed it off like a fly. "They're hands off," she said, flipping pages. "Just here to keep things pretty." I nodded, skimmed a contract the size of a phone book, and signed faster than a kid claiming shotgun, and for a while everything was perfect. The house needed work, but I had time. I fixed floors, painted walls, even got a hammock. I mapped out a garden that was going to feed me tomatoes and smug satisfaction. The neighbors waved. The town was quiet. It was the first time I'd heard silence and didn't feel like I'd left something unfinished. Then March came. On a gray morning, I heard shouting outside and opened the door to a scene I wasn't invited to. Trucks, workers, fence panels stacked like they were building a border. I asked what was happening, and Clarissa introduced herself like she was greeting a trespasser. "We're installing boundaries for the new community recreation area," she said, her voice dipped in customer service tone. I told her there must be a mistake, that yard was part of my deed. She smiled, tapped her folder, and said, "Actually, Section 14 of the HOA Charter reclassifies this area as communal space. You really should have read it more carefully." I rushed back inside, dug through paperwork, and found exactly what I feared: vague language, legal landmines, and enough ambiguity to make an honest man feel foolish. No maps, no diagrams, just paragraph soup that could mean anything if the board voted hard enough. When I came back out, Clarissa was directing the crew like a general, and when I pointed out the lack of specificity, her smile vanished. "You're welcome to bring it up at the next meeting," she said, "but I'd advise against interfering with an approved project." Her eyes said she dared me. I didn't interfere. I watched. Watched them wrap my dream in chain link and padlocks. Watched Clarissa walk the perimeter like she'd conquered something. That night, I stared out the window at what used to be my backyard and realized that being right doesn't matter when someone's already holding the hammer. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of every penny, every paper I signed, every assumption I made about safety and trust. Around 2 a.m., I went down to the basement to find the original property documents, desperate for anything. That's when I noticed the old wooden bookshelf wedged against the back wall. One of those antique things that leaned when you breathed on it. I nudged it aside, and behind it, I saw something strange, a seam in the stone. Not random, not natural, a door. I traced the edge with my hand, found a latch, pressed, and felt something click. The wall gave way. Dust coughed out. I pulled, and the stone opened into a tunnel. Narrow, musty, reinforced. I stood there with a flashlight, heart pounding. It was real, something old, something secret. And as I stepped inside, a thought hit me like a freight train. Clarissa thought she'd cut me off, but all she'd done was build a fence over her own trap, and I had just found the key. I didn't go looking for a tunnel, I was just looking for answers, or a paper trail, or even a loophole I could squeeze some hope through. It was past midnight, and my kitchen table was a battlefield of documents, maps, and rage-fueled sticky notes. I figured maybe the previous owner had left something behind that could help me fight back. So I grabbed a flashlight and headed down to the one part of the house I hadn't really touched since moving in. The basement, cold, musty, and full of old furniture and half-forgotten history. Then I bumped into the warped bookshelf in the corner, and the whole thing groaned like it had been waiting 80 years to be noticed. That's when I saw it. The seam. A vertical outline just visible in the stone wall, like someone had drawn a secret in pencil and dared me to find it. I pushed. Heard a click. And just like that, a piece of history opened up like a confession. The door was heavy but smooth, like it had been used once, maybe often, and forgotten. Behind it was a narrow tunnel, no more than 5 feet tall, lined with thick oak beams and the smell of earth that hadn't seen light since FDR was in office. I stepped inside cautiously, ducking low, brushing past cobwebs and generations of silence. The ground beneath me was packed soil with wooden slats laid down in places like someone cared enough to make the journey less miserable. As I walked deeper, my flashlight picked up old candle stubs in rusted brackets, and for a second, I forgot I was fighting a fence. I was walking into history. Prohibition era, by the look of it, smugglers, bootleggers, maybe even secret meetings for folks who needed to stay off the grid. I had no idea why this tunnel was here or who had built it, but I knew one thing. If it came out where I thought it did, this was no longer just my secret. It was my weapon, and secrets make terrible neighbors for liars. After what felt like half a football field of crouching and flashlight whispering through the dark, the tunnel angled up. At the end was a ladder leading to a wooden hatch. I gave it a push and felt resistance, but not locked resistance, more like carefully hidden intention. When I finally nudged it open, I poked my head out through a flat rock disguised as part of the landscaping, and there it was, the other side of the fence, my yard, my stolen yard, now fenced off, padlocked, and proudly displaying a shiny new sign in HOA beige, "Coming soon, private pool and pavilion exclusive to members." That word exclusive did more damage than any bolt cutter could have. I wasn't just fenced out. I was being flipped into a selling point for Clarissa's clique. My loss was their gain. My land was now a feature on their brochure, but they didn't know about the tunnel, and they sure didn't know about the man who just emerged from beneath it with nothing left to lose. That's when the real fight began. I climbed back down, shut the hatch, and retraced my steps through the tunnel, each footstep hitting harder than the last. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was calculating. Clarissa's plan wasn't about community benefit. It was about property value. That pool and pavilion, they'd give her and her buddies the kind of exclusivity that adds zeros to home appraisals. And conveniently, her home, along with those of the 3 most vocal board members, backed right up to the newly fenced zone. Funny how that works, isn't it? They used bylaws like barbed wire, wrapped themselves in technicalities. But here's the thing, for every clause she twisted above ground, I had an oak-framed secret running quietly right underneath. Her fence was iron, my tunnel was oak. Let's see which holds up longer. Because while they paved lies up top, I had the kind of truth that buries careers when the lights come on. That night, as I lay in bed with a dirt-smudged flashlight on my nightstand, I couldn't stop thinking about the contrast. Above me was a woman playing queen with a paper crown, building castles out of misused authority. But beneath me, a tunnel built by outlaws, rebels, maybe even heroes who knew how to survive outside the system. Maybe it was bootleggers once. Maybe it was a way out for someone who needed to stay hidden. And now, it was my back door into a fight I never asked for but was fully prepared to win. Because I wasn't going to knock on Clarissa's door and beg. I was going to come up from under it, camera in hand, facts in pocket, and history on my side. And if you think a smug HOA board is tough to beat, try arguing with a tunnel that's been waiting 100 years for someone to crawl through it with a plan. This wasn't over, not even close. So if you think that was wild, wait until you see what I found next. Because that tunnel didn't just lead to my backyard, it led to the truth buried under years of HOA lies and the first real crack in Clarissa's perfect little kingdom. You're gonna want to see how deep this goes. Hit that subscribe button, follow the story, and stick around, because in the next part, the past and present collide, and the HOA's exclusive project starts to unravel from the inside out. Trust me, it's just getting good. The next morning, I woke up sore, slightly dusty, and absolutely certain of one thing. If I was going to win this war, I'd need more than a flashlight and a tunnel. I needed records. Something older than Clarissa's smug declarations and newer than the ink on my mortgage. So I headed straight to the one place that still smelled like truth. The public library. It was the kind of building that hadn't changed since Truman left office. Thick carpet, whisper-only air, and a front desk ruled by Irene Beaumont, a widow in her 70s with a spine straighter than her filing system and a gaze that could freeze tap water. I asked about my property, explained the situation in the broadest, most polite terms I could, and before I even finished my sentence, she raised one eyebrow, turned on her heel, and said, "Come with me. You're not the first." And just like that, the story started to get bigger and heavier. Irene walked me through aisles of forgotten facts and into a locked records room that felt more like a vault than a library. She pulled a thick, dust-covered binder from a high shelf, flipped it open with the kind of reverence usually reserved for Bibles or bourbon, and there it was, an original survey map from 1924. My property, my lines, and clear as daylight, the back boundary extending exactly where I thought it did, right up to the park line. No mention of shared access, no signs of subdivision. Irene squinted at the map, tapped a brittle corner, and said, "This here predates the HOA by half a century. If someone's claiming otherwise, they're either mistaken or lying." And that, coming from Irene, was the equivalent of a gavel drop. I leaned in closer. The lines weren't just drawn, they were carved, inked in thick black, signed and notarized, the kind of documentation no software update could erase. It felt like holding a receipt for every square foot Clarissa thought she'd stolen. But I needed a second opinion, one with a legal resume. Enter Russell Kane, my next-door neighbor and a retired circuit court judge who spent most of his mornings pruning hydrangeas and pretending not to eavesdrop. I caught him out front that afternoon and asked if I could run something by him. When I unrolled the map on his kitchen table and told him what Clarissa's crew had done, he didn't say a word for a full minute. Just stared at the paper like it had slapped him. Then he let out a long breath, looked me square in the eye, and said, "They're bluffing. You've got a winning hand. They're hoping you never call it." He pulled out a magnifier and started walking me through the legal significance of every stamp and signature. According to Russell, the HOA could have tried to claim community easement if they had legally amended the subdivision, but there was no record of that. What they'd done was rely on digital maps updated in the early 2000s, which, as Russell put it, were about as binding as a pizza coupon. He explained how HOAs sometimes reinterpret plat maps when no one's watching, slipping in easements and shared zones with enough vague language to avoid direct lawsuits. But they rarely go up against original documentation because those records, the old ones, actual paper, not PDFs, carry legal weight that's hard to wiggle out of. And suddenly I understood the game Clarissa was playing. She didn't expect anyone to question her because most folks wouldn't know where to start. They bet on ignorance. But I had archives. Irene's careful cataloging and Russell's trained eye had handed me what Clarissa never thought I'd find: proof. Not just emotional proof, legal proof. I rolled the map back up slowly, like I was packing a loaded weapon. Because in Hollow Creek, where the bourbon was older than the bylaws, truth had a habit of aging well and hitting hard when uncorked. What struck me most, though, wasn't just the discovery. It was who helped me get there. A widow librarian and a retired judge. Two people who'd seen their fair share of slick talkers and legal gray zones. They didn't need grandstanding or viral videos. They used ink, dates, and memory. And that was the quiet power I needed. Clarissa had her board, her fence, and her fake maps. I had Irene, Russell, and the kind of documents that had outlived 3 zoning commissioners. It wasn't a fair fight, it was a slow one, but I had time, and more importantly, I had momentum. Because now I wasn't just angry. I was armed, and the next time Clarissa smirked from across her iron fence, I'd be smiling back. Not with defiance, but with paperwork. The kind that sticks. The kind that ends meetings before they start. Clarissa built her kingdom with fences and formality. I responded with a backpack full of cameras and a tunnel that answered to no board vote. 2 nights after Russell confirmed I had the legal high ground, I crawled back through the dirt path under my house. This time not just to look, but to listen. I'd bought 4 wireless microcams with night vision and motion triggers, the kind of equipment that would make any HOA member nervous if they knew it existed, and downright terrified once they found out where I placed them. Behind landscaping rocks, tucked in birdhouses, even hidden inside one of the plastic HOA members-only signs they'd drilled into my lawn like a flag on the moon. I didn't need to confront Clarissa. I just needed her to keep talking. And oh, did she talk. Within 48 hours, I had my first hit, Clarissa, pacing the future pool site, on the phone with someone named Gary about fast-tracking an inspection. She mentioned a consulting bonus and something about cutting through red tape. Translation? A bribe wrapped in an invoice. The next day, I caught William Spence, the same guy who'd been taking measurements on day 1, chatting with Clarissa about adjusting the survey stakes, to give them a few extra feet of space while no one's looking. It was all there, on tape, on my laptop, in folders titled Fence Fraud Volume 1, Queen Clarissa's Greatest Hits, and my personal favorite, Oops, you said that out loud. While they were playing HOA Monopoly, I was collecting GoPro-grade receipts. They ruled with fences, I fought back with footage. And while their kingdom had views, mine had evidence. The break came when I saw someone at the site who didn't fit. The board secretary, Trina West. Young, mid-30s, clipboard in hand, but not acting like a true believer. She kept glancing around, not with pride, but with guilt. The footage showed her shaking her head while reviewing papers and walking away from Clarissa mid-conversation. A few days later, at a neighborhood gathering, yes, I still went, I approached her, soft voice, careful tone. She was nervous, but when I mentioned the fence and how fast the board pushed it through, her eyes changed. She didn't confess, not yet, but she didn't defend Clarissa either. Instead, she muttered, "There's more going on than most people know," before giving me her number and saying, "Call me if you really want to understand what this is about." I didn't push, just nodded. Sometimes, the quiet ones carry the loudest truths, and she was about to become my best-kept secret. When I called her that evening, she answered like she was checking for echoes, said she couldn't talk long but confirmed my suspicions. The HOA had doctored voting records, claimed projects were board-approved, when only Clarissa and William had seen the documents. Trina had tried to raise questions once and got shut down so fast it made her rethink her entire role. "They used my signature on a budget I never signed," she whispered. "And I need this job, my kids on my health plan." She didn't want revenge, she wanted distance, safety. But I offered something better, exposure. I told her I had video, audio, property records, and a tunnel. When I said that last part, she paused. "You're serious?" she asked. "Dead serious," I said. "They built their plan on paper. I built mine under it." That's when she offered to help, as long as her name stayed out of it, at least for now. Help, and just like that, Clarissa had a leak inside the gates. Each night after that became a routine. Me crawling through the tunnel with a portable hard drive, collecting more footage than a reality TV show gone rogue. Every lie they told, every shortcut they took, every casual comment that revealed a larger scheme, it all went in the archive. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just built a case. Quietly, thoroughly, legally. Clarissa's throne wasn't made of stone, it was made of arrogance and assumption, and the higher her throne, the harder the fall, especially when it's built on receipts. I knew the time would come to play my hand, but not yet. Not until the foundation cracked wide open, not until I could swing the hammer and make it count, because while Clarissa strutted through her half-built oasis, I was watching from every angle. And what she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that the walls weren't closing in. The ground was. So while Clarissa was busy planning her champagne ribbon cutting, I was busy planting cameras, gathering proof, and gaining an inside ally with a conscience and a clipboard. And just when she thought I was fenced out for good, she invited me into the lion's den, a private planning session with her inner circle. I accepted with a smile and a secret. Trust me, you won't believe what happened next. Hit that subscribe button and follow the channel, because in the next part, I step into Clarissa's world, play the role of the obedient newcomer, and start setting the stage for her downfall from the inside out. You're not going to want to miss it. Clarissa thought she was inviting me into the inner circle. What she didn't know was I'd already built a circle of my own. Quieter, smarter, and wired with enough evidence to bring her clubhouse empire down to its concrete foundation. The planning session was held in her perfectly polished living room, the kind of space where no one actually lives, just postures. She served wine with labels I couldn't pronounce, and laid out blueprints like she was unveiling a military campaign. William Spence, her go-to contractor, sat to her right, nodding like a bobblehead, and 2 other board members filled out the fan club. I walked in, smiled, nodded, and played the role of curious tech guy who wanted to help. She thought I was being converted. But I wasn't their newest ally. I was their walking subpoena. Clarissa's mouth moved like a magician's hands, confident, rehearsed, and always hiding something. Phase 2 is where things get exciting, she said, unrolling an aerial site map. These 5 additional lots here, she pointed to several shaded parcels, will become part of the expanded community zone. We're finalizing easement paperwork quietly before the next meeting. Most folks won't even know it passed until it's done. I tilted my head and acted impressed, but inside I was ticking off names. Those lots she was reassigning belonged to people I'd met, people who waved from porches, shared recipes, and never once imagined their backyards were being drawn into someone else's property value scheme. It wasn't just a land grab. It was a silent auction where the only bidders were in the room and no one else got an invite. Over the following weeks, I embedded myself like a polite virus. I volunteered for HOA event planning, offered to set up a digital archive for meeting minutes, and even suggested a software-based gate access system, one I, of course, would help manage. They loved it. Clarissa called me forward-thinking, William said. I was refreshing. And one of the bubbleheads actually asked if I'd consider running for the board next year, smiled, played dumb, and kept showing up. But while they were giving me small roles in their play, I was rewriting the script backstage. Every time they said something questionable, I logged it. Every time a document passed with too few eyes, I had Trina check the metadata. Every misstep they thought they'd buried, I was exhuming. File by file, email. Trina West, the reluctant secretary, became my stealth co-pilot. She started slipping me internal memos marked confidential, complete with forged timestamps and ghost votes. One showed a board-approved invoice for landscaping services from a vendor that didn't exist. Another was a purchase order for security lighting signed by a board member who'd been on vacation in Maine the entire month. Every piece of paper came with a sigh from Trina and a muttered, "They They think nobody reads this stuff. I told her she wasn't nobody. I told her we were building something stronger than a fence. We were building a case. And then came Terry Brooks. Terry was the project manager on the Recreation Center build, a man whose hard hat had seen more action than most HOA presidents had seen daylight. He was a good guy, but tired. He pulled me aside after one of the board meetings and said, "This ain't sitting right with me, Miles. William keeps changing specs, wants to use thinner concrete, cheaper materials, says it's all approved, but none of it's safe." I asked if he had documentation. He laughed and said, "I keep everything. You never know when you'll need to remember who lied first." I asked if he'd be willing to talk to someone outside the HOA. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You bring me the right person, I'll bring the receipts." That's when I called Emily Wright. Emily was a local reporter with a nose for corruption and a tolerance for coffee that bordered on dangerous. I sent her a secure packet, some emails, a clip of Clarissa talking about expanding the perimeter quietly, and a side-by-side of the original 1924 survey map versus the HOA's new digital fabrication. She called me that same night. "This is big," she said, "but I'll need to verify it myself." I told her to bring her team and to be ready, because we were setting the date. I also called the city's building inspection office and filed a formal complaint, anonymously, of course. Unsafe practices, zoning manipulation, failure to follow permits, the works. The inspector would show up unannounced. Emily's crew would already be rolling, and I'd be there, smiling in the background with a folder full of fireworks. The morning of the inspection was quiet. Too quiet. Clarissa was in full celebration mode, wearing a scarf that probably cost more than my kitchen sink, walking William through the site and gesturing like royalty, pointing out new land. "Can't you just see it?" she asked me. "This is going to raise every property value within 5 blocks." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "You've got vision, Clarissa, that's for sure." Then the city inspector's truck rolled in, gravel crunching under tires. Clarissa's face stiffened. William cursed under his breath. They scrambled, approached the inspector with the kind of urgency you usually reserve for fire alarms and IRS audits. "We weren't expecting anyone today," she said. "We've already passed our last inspection." The inspector raised a clipboard and replied, "Not according to our records. We're responding to some recent concerns." And then, like the final stroke of a master painting, Emily's team arrived. Camera on shoulder, boom mic swinging low, microphone clipped to her collar. "Clarissa Vaughn?" she asked. "Emily Wright, Hollow County News. We'd like a comment on the alleged misuse of HOA funds and property misrepresentation." Clarissa stammered. William tried to intercept. The inspector began taking photos of exposed wiring and mismatched materials. I stepped back and let the moment unfold. I didn't need to say a word. She played chess with pawns. I was tunneling under the board, and now the board was splintering under her feet. Clarissa's empire didn't collapse quietly. It shattered. Publicly, loudly, and under the very spotlight she thought she controlled. The inspector found enough violations in 10 minutes to make a contractor blush. Emily's camera captured every flinch, every stutter, every desperate attempt at damage control. When she asked about the unapproved funds, the falsified votes, the exclusive member-only scheme built on land that wasn't legally the HOA's to begin with, Clarissa snapped, "This is harassment," she hissed, voice rising like a tea kettle ready to blow. "You people don't understand what it takes to run a community." I smiled behind my coffee. "Maybe," I said, "but I know what it takes to own your own land." And in that moment, Clarissa realized she wasn't standing on power, she was standing on my deed, and the whole neighborhood had come to watch. Within a week, the board voted to remove her. William resigned 2 days later after a city audit froze all his construction contracts. Trina, bless her brave soul, handed over every internal email, every forged vote, and every backdated file she'd been quietly collecting since this all started. Turns out, Clarissa's paper trail was more like a parade, full of banners, fireworks, and receipts. Emily's article went live that Friday. The Hollow Creek Conspiracy. how one homeowner uncovered the HOA's dirty blueprint. It exploded. Front page, shared like wildfire. I couldn't walk into the post office without someone patting me on the back or asking if the tunnel was real. Real enough to take down a queen, I'd say, and it was. Justice didn't knock on the front door. It came up from the basement. The legal fallout hit fast. The district attorney opened an investigation. Clarissa was charged with fraud, falsification of public records, and misuse of HOA funds. Her trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified. So did Trina. So did Russell, who brought the original maps with him like he was presenting a national treasure. Clarissa showed no remorse. Not in court, not in the interview, not even when the judge handed down a 3-year prison sentence and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA and affected homeowners. William took a plea deal, 18 months, license revoked, and bankruptcy paperwork thicker than the blueprints he never followed. The city quietly fired Gary, the building inspector, and launched an internal review that led to 2 more resignations. It wasn't just a win. It was a reset, the kind you hope for but never expect to actually see. And somehow it had started with a fence. The best part, my backyard was mine again. The fence came down within days. Clarissa's signs were pulled out, her locks cut, her padlocked dreams tossed like bad confetti. The tunnel, my tunnel, was cleaned, reinforced, and officially recognized as a historical feature. I worked with the local historical society to document its origin, preserve its structure, and build a small entrance exhibit at the back of the property. School tours came through, reporters visited. One kid even asked if I was a modern-day outlaw. I laughed, but honestly, it didn't feel too far off. From stolen yard to sacred ground, this garden bloomed from grit. And speaking of gardens, that barren patch of dirt they once tried to fence off, it became something better, something real. The community came together, donated tools, seeds, time, raised beds were built, a compost station, even a picnic area where the old pavilion was supposed to go. It wasn't exclusive, it was open, and it felt exactly like home should. People started asking for help. Emails, messages, calls. How did you fight back? Where do I start? Do you have copies of those maps? I built a simple website, posted templates for document requests, shared everything I'd learned, from the legal loopholes to the language HOAs use to bury power in paperwork. And then came the speaking invites. Local homeowner groups, then regional conferences, then a national event in Denver where I stood on a stage and told the story of a tunnel, a lie, and the quiet war we all fight to keep what's ours. I told them, the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits in the dark, buried under dust and silence, until someone dares to look. And once you see it, you don't flinch. You act. Because when you own the truth, you don't need to raise your voice. You just raise the curtain. And as I stood in the middle of that garden, on the very ground someone once tried to steal with a smile and a signature, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Stillness. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from knowing you stood your ground. You didn't flinch. You didn't fold. You followed the truth even when it was buried in dirt and decades of bad paperwork, and somehow that truth turned into tomatoes, laughter, and neighbors who finally saw each other not as HOA dues, but as people. This wasn't just a win for me. It was a reminder for all of us. Power only works when people stay quiet, but community works when one person stands up and reminds everyone else what's fair, what's right, and what belongs to them. We fought back, not with yelling or lawsuits first, but with old maps, new friends, and a tunnel that carried history and justice in equal measure. So if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of a time you were underestimated or pushed aside or told it's too late to fight back, don't let it stop there. Drop a comment below and tell me about your HOA moment or the time you stood your ground. Like this video if you believe truth is worth digging for, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story, the next lesson, or the next quiet victory that reminds us Sometimes justice doesn't come from above, it comes from underneath, just like that tunnel. I've got more stories like this, and I promise you, they only get better.